In this episode of the podcast called Let's Go Digital, I'll be speaking with Dan Goldin. Dan is the chief architect at the adexchange company called TripleLift, which is based in New York. The company is in the field of programmatic advertising. We'll be speaking about real-time data, connected TV, supply chain efficiencies, and other interesting points. I'd first heard Dan in 2018 when he spoke about data pipelines at a webinar, and I wanted to learn more on the subject. So here's an extract of our discussion. Hope you enjoy the talk. I came across your YouTube video presentation on data pipelines. So that dated from 2018. My idea was to ask you for updates on the information you provided. If you could tell us a bit more about what happened since your last presentation.
In terms of like the ad ecosystem, the technologies?
Yeah, how the technology progressed and the architecture that we are talking about, like the Lambda architecture. I think that's what you ended your talk with.
Yeah.
The last time.
So I mean, there in general, there's a big push towards, one, just growing. If you're a successful company, right, you're just ingesting more and more data. So there's always this element of how long could you scale horizontally with the approach you have. So we've had to make some adaptations in our data pipeline in order to support like order of magnitude more volume. So for example, rewriting some jobs to make them easy to be parallelizable, right? Easy to run across more instances versus sort of bigger instances. The other big theme for us was real time. So back then we were doing some, but not a lot. Like these days we're doing a lot more. Right, we're trying to truly lean into this like Lambda architecture where you have a variety of streaming jobs that take this data from multiple sources, join them together, and then surface them for users, for both human users to sort of dig into campaigns like soon after they're live, but also automated systems that could react to changes in the ecosystem. So an example of that could be identifying ads, let's say, that don't start, or they may be losing us money and then blocking them before they spend a huge amount on the platform. Like that sort of idea. And that's sort of like the big active thing for us, right? It's like, how do we optimize the batch world? Meaning, process more data faster, cheaper, right? It's sort of this, you can actually think of the data processing, at least in the batch world in our mind, as being this triangle of trying to balance cost and performance. Cost, performance, and size. Because it's like if you sample the data, right? If you do 1 out of 100, like it's going to be cheaper to process and it's going to be faster to process. If you want to process everything, then you could decide, like, do you want to be slower and it'll take longer, but it might be cheaper, or are you willing to pay up front more in order to do everything fast? So that ends up being like a commercial question. Like, what do we need to do and how do we sort of meet the requirements we have? And the real time, it's similar. It's around like, what is the data we need? And if you introduce more and more dimensions, it just becomes more and more complicated. If you want more and more accuracy, it also becomes more and more costly. So it's figuring out the right levels, sort of trade-offs we want to make in order to deliver sort of our value. We're lucky in one sense because a lot of our sort of value is internal, right? So we could talk to internal users. We aren't necessarily like subject to some contractual agreements for some of these things. They're more about like our business operations, right? If you give, let's say, someone on our, think of it as, let's say, an account management team, the data 1 minute faster versus, so let's say 5 minutes versus 6 minutes, like that's probably not going to change their day-to-day too much, right? But it will affect more of these automated systems. So the more we're doing with automation, then you get real value by being able to move faster. There's this other, I would say, more broad theme where trying to figure out as we get larger, like both as a business, but also as number of employees, how can we share data knowledge, right? So everyone's speaking the same definitions, everyone has the same language. Especially as we have international offices. Like when we make a new change, how do we make sure that the people that are looking at the data understand how to interpret it, like given some of the changes?
And what about the technology? In fact, I think the last time you were speaking about Redshift and Sparks and Druid and all. So has this evolved over time?
Yeah, that's probably that was probably a pretty big innovation. So back then, when I spoke about it, we were pretty leaned into Spark for doing a lot of our like batch workloads. So these days we're still doing that, but we're pretty active on Snowflake as well, especially for the business intelligence use cases. So the thinking there is we ingest a ton of data, we process it using Spark jobs, and then the output of that goes into a variety of different systems. One of them is Snowflake, and that's generally powering the bulk of our business intelligence. The real time, we're exploring KSQL, so it's like a Kafka SQL library. We're exploring like some vendors like Materialize, Rockset, but generally try to figure out, trying to move away from, I would say, like these very home-built solutions that have a very specific use case and into more of these frameworks that impose some constraints, but do make it easy to develop newer applications.
In terms of the industry, for instance, I remember the last time you spoke about the 200 milliseconds for an RTB, and that kind of figures and statistics, have they changed? Is it faster now?
It's similar. Like the performance, I think has generally been similar. Some of the bigger themes are the rise of video, so video advertising, and not just video ads you see on a website, but advertising within, I would say, like streaming television. So, like a Roku box, right? If you have one of those, like a Fire TV, like being able to do more of those advertising within these newer consumption channels. I mean, in essence, it's saying like people are cutting the cord and no longer paying for cable. Cable used to have advertising every 8 minutes. Like, what's the replacement for that? Hulu does that, right? Similar cool money. But that, because it's happening outside of traditional television, broadcast television, you're able to leverage a lot more of the ad tech ecosystem. And you do run into, slightly different. It's sort of like at a high level, it's similar, right, to the like modern digital advertising, but there are some differences. So, for example, you may, like on the website, what happens is you are watching you open a web page, it makes some, web requests, and then you get an ad render a second later. When you're doing TV or like streaming, like typically the ad gets fetched earlier and it's sort of cached and ready to serve because you don't want to disrupt the user experience. So, that from a data standpoint, that means, there might be more delays. Like you may be used to seeing events happen within seconds of one another. Now it might be minutes, hours. So how do you react to that? How do you think about that? And then the other big theme across the entire industry is like privacy and identity, right? We, like as a company, acquired sort of like a new age data management platform called OnePlus X I want to say like a month and a half ago. But that's, the problem that's trying to solve is a lot of the modern web like advertising ecosystem relies on third-party cookies, right? It's being able to know that when I visited one website and then I visit another website, it is still me, right? So if you're an advertiser, you need that information because then you're able to work with other vendors to build profiles. You might be able to say that, hey, Dan is interested in cars. Dan is interested in travel. And then you're using that information to give me advertising that you believe I'll react positively to. If the industry loses the ability to build these profiles across behavior across multiple websites, like that becomes a problem. So like how does the industry react to that? How do we work around that? So that's like the other big theme, right? So two major themes, like connected television, so streaming, and then privacy and identity, and like what happens like in this future world.
In Europe, we have this new cookie revolution where we have the GDPR that is going to kick in within.
It's not that new anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So people are trying to find different means and ways and to work around and find solutions to this. And is it the similar situation in the United States?
Well, yes, to an extent, right? Because California has CCPA, so that's like a sort of California equivalent to GDPR. But like at the end of the day, we as TripleLift are a global company, right? Like sure, we're based in the New York in the United States, but like we have offices in Germany, offices in London, right? Or an office in London. So the point is like, if you're a publisher, right? Like if you're a website producer, like you're going to have readers from all across the world.
Sure,
so that's the world we live in.
So I guess if you have problems collecting data, third-party cookies and all, so I guess as an ad exchange, you might have the problem might trickle down at your level.
For sure. I mean, the entire industry reacted to it, and there's different themes there, right? And like one theme that's like there's quite a lot you could read on like adexchanger, especially like I just don't want to say what might be confidential or not. That's why I'm like sort of a little bit hesitant. But what we have our product managers, out in market talking about it, like at conferences, like what our approach is, like how we're thinking about it. So I will like take a look at some of the content on like adexchanger or like TripleLift plus 1+X just to get a feel, for how we're approaching it. And it's probably going to be like similar to other ad tech companies, but different enough. Like each company's gonna have their own flavor, right? Their own way of dealing with this. Part of it's not even like to add like I think you approached it from the GDPR like regulatory landscape, right? The GDPR CCPA, but like beyond that, there's this sort of technical angle. So it started with Apple getting rid of identifiers, right? You could see what happened to Facebook stock, right? We're no longer able to track users across apps. So if you install, one app, I'm not going to, like Facebook can't back it up to an ad you may have seen on Instagram. So that's a problem, like for them, right? So they're trying to react to it. But the idea is that this is starting to move towards browsers. So like future versions of Chrome may introduce that same level of control or like, constraint.
Right.
Like, what do you do then? So like there's a lot happening on this, you can have like this post third party cookie world, and there's a ton of different proposals floating out there that are still being evaluated, like Fledge, and a lot of them are named after like birds. So like if you search for like a little Fledge privacy proposal, Flock privacy proposal, you'll get a feel. Like Parakeet is like a Microsoft version policy proposal. You'll get a feel for the the way these large platforms are thinking about it. Like what will Chrome work? How will advertising work in Chrome?
Right. Yeah. To come back a bit to the question of optimization of data, working between the end user and the DSPs, do you have issues related to data quality, or is it relevant in your kind of business?
I think by nature of the industry, ad tech in general, and the fact that so much of it happens from the browser, there's like oftentimes, right, like you're at the mercy of what you receive. But I do think the industry itself has been getting a bit better around transparency, right? There's a few proposals out there, like sellers.json, ads.txt, that sort of are meant to provide visibility to the supply chain, right? When you think about the advertising supply chain, it's not two parties transacting. It's not like a website and an advertiser, right? There's companies in between. So a lot of these proposals are meant to, like between each hop, between each layer, be able to say, hey, this request is correct, right? This is sort of this next user is able to speak on my behalf. Like this next, this next system is able to speak on my behalf. So there's a lot of, I was like progress happening there. And a lot of it is driven, like, as you can imagine, from buyers, because if you're, you have dollars going to advertising, you want to know that you're buying what you think you're buying, right? Which one buy.
Right.
Right. So in some cases, like we're benefiting from it, right? Because like we generally have a clean ecosystem. Like we work with a lot of third parties that help monitor and like audit the quality.
Right.
But yeah, like the other theme, like we spoke about like different themes. Like we might talk about like streaming television. We spoke about privacy and identity. The other big one, I think you remind me, is like supply chain efficiency. Right. So the idea there being, if you go to a website and you see an ad, that ad to a buyer may have appeared multiple times, right, across different paths, right? They could have gotten a request from TripleLift. They could have gotten a similar request from one of our competitors. So how does the buyer in that case, minimize the amount of duplication they're seeing?
Right. What about the aspects such as machine learning and artificial intelligence? Because I was speaking with one of the solution providers of CDPs. He spoke to me about machine learning applications that he's used with the CDPs. Do ad exchanges have these functionalities?
Well, for sure, right? Like, and it ranges from like simple cases. So in our case, right, the last point around like supply chain efficiency, right? If we think that an ad request is not valuable to our buyers, we won't process it fully. Right. Think of it as, and that's arguably even like a cost savings thing, right? Like because it costs us money to process, it costs us money to send requests out. So if we don't send it and we're confident that it's not valuable, like why should we? So that's a relatively simple case, right? The more complex ones are around sort of just understanding what's happening in our ecosystem, in our marketplace, like what kind of supply, like inventory is valuable. Like, could we bring on more of it? Like we're doing a fair amount now on the sort of video processing and content analysis. Right? So being able to say, this website is talking about cars. This video is about cats. So thinking of different opportunities that way, right, to understand the content at a deeper level. Like
Right.
I think our origin is also doing a lot. Like our origin as a company is doing native advertising. So that's the idea. There is having content or ads that match the look and feel of surrounding content. So rather than having things that look like very standard banner ads, it's thinking about images or like the components of an ad, right? An image, a headline, and caption, and then making them look as if they belong to the publisher and not ruin the consumer experience. And in that case, we have a strong history on the computer vision side, being able to identify key features of an image, right? So if you give us a rectangular image, like for one website it might be vertical, for another one it might be square. So being able to know how to crop it and resize it, right, in order to still adhere to the brand sort of promises and brand guarantees. And that's very like computer vision focused. Now we're applying it to video, like more and more and more. Like I think every data, like even beyond, I would say ad tech, like I think every company is integrating like AI ML in some way. Although I do think it's a buzzword in a sense, because like, what does that actually mean? But I do think there's like big need, right? To just be more intelligent with the data for that. Like even if it's generally, regressions, it might be simple.
When we were talking about pipelines and accelerating data and all, I guess we also need to think about the hardware aspects of the systems. So I was looking up this company called Aerospike, and they have, I think they have some flash drives and new kinds of systems for storing data and all. So what's happening in that area? What's the latest in reducing latencies?
So we use Aerospike. Like Aerospike's big in the entire ad tech space. I don't know. It's interesting because I would say I think as an industry, ad tech has specific needs, but they're not as sensitive as someone like fintech, right? Because so for example, in quantitative trading, like in that case, right, you hear stories of people digging up roads and laying fiber optic cables to minimize latency. Like we're not doing that, right? For us, that 200 milliseconds is generally sort of the constraint, and like within there, we'll do whatever we want. So we don't necessarily need as much of a focus on like true performance. Like for us, I think it's more about figuring out like how do we deal with complex scale, and then how do we do it at a reasonable cost.
Right, cost and the scale.
And I don't know. Like I generally think that the ecosystem is evolving, right? Like to your point, like Aerospike runs on better hardware now. Like AWS, like we're big on the Amazon, AWS, and AWS is releasing their own microchips, right, that are like ARM based, right? And that once again, like it improves performance, but it also improves performance, per dollar. And so it's like these things are, I would say, in our mind, a bit more important than like straight up like nothing's, I would say, like impossible for us that we wish we could do. It's more about, are we willing to pay for that?
Since you're talking about the financial aspect of the business, I was wondering the cost of technology. In 2018, when you had the presentation, you were speaking about your company having 200 employees. How do you kind of optimize your costs?
Yeah, I mean, as we've grown, as we've grown, right, for sure, we've opened up additional offices like around the world. Once again, we acquired this company that's based in Switzerland, right? So we have an engineering office in Zurich now. But like more broadly, I think every company is competing with every other company, and it needs to be global, right? So for us, it's like, how do we find the best engineers wherever they may be? And typically, right, like I think cost is a factor, right? I think for every company, right, they'll say, of course, even if it's not, like obviously it is. Like everyone has a financial plan, everyone has like goals. But like for us, the general value of an average engineer is going to be more than the cost, like for almost everything we do. Right. And if that's the case, like for us, it's more about finding the engineers that are capable, like to do the work, and then building up a strong product roadmap, technical roadmap, sort of to execute on that vision.
Now we get an overview of how adexchanges are engineered. Thanks to Dan for taking the time off and for participating in this podcast. Now, if you're listening to this, feel free to post your comments and tell us what you think. Bye-bye and stay in touch.